So thanks, Eddie. We're back, and you're giving some great examples of communities that have pushed back to fight for environmental justice in South Bronx. The Hunts Point area had some success, and it sounded like when that community benefits, everybody wins, because what's happening is Hunts Point food distribution, like you said, serves something like 23 million people. The food is safer, and I was thinking, there's this, what is this, Lenin, if I might quote Lenin for a second, who said something like every
John or Vladimir?
Vladimir, of course. So
is it Vladimir? I'm sorry. What's the Russian Lenin's first name? I should remember this. I don't remember.
I think it starts with a V. Vladimir.
Is it Vladimir?
Yeah.
You all got Putin on the brain these days.
So I know, too many. Yeah.
Keep going. I'm sorry.
So
Lenin said.
He said something like every society is 3 missed meals away from collapse. So it's not to be taken lightly, so we're all dependent on each other. And I love the example, you talked about Industry City and Sunset Park. The Uprose group, is able to get a rezoning plan. Is that correct? And then secure some offshore wind. And so I'm just wondering, you met with the group I work with in West Harlem, and interested in, very small group with very small budget. And so where does it start? Does it start by this need, assessing what the problems are? Does it start with, reaching out to elected officials? Does it start going door to door? I just like at the very basic level, where do you start organizing for environmental justice?
Sure. So there are two things, and it really depends on some level who the you is, right? Like, let's be like straightforward about issues like race. If you're a white person organizing in say mostly white community, and you want to do grassroots environmental activism, there's a very, I don't want to say specific, there's a very clear, not one, but there's some clear and obvious steps one could take to do that, and I'll go over that. Environmental justice is different given the specific racial justice dynamics and disparities and empowerment that movement encompasses, right? So let me begin with just a generic grassroots environmental campaign. If you're a white person in a white neighborhood, clearly, like we began in the first segment talking about, just looking around your neighborhood and just trying to notice what is it about air quality or water quality, or what the land use is like in your neighborhood. Just being aware and just monitoring, or just trying to assess, if your community has, say a heavy highway that bisects it. Is there polluting infrastructure that bisects it, or intersects with it, or overlaps with it? Are there polluting uses, maybe not immediately in your neighborhood, but say within a mile of your community? What the first thing is just a basic assessment of what does your built environment look like to you? And it can look a bunch of different ways, because what I often tell people is sometimes folks tend to overcomplicate environment. That people hear environment and all of a sudden, people start thinking it's all about like, high level, highly detailed technical and legal and scientific.
Say the Paris Treaty or something like that. Yeah.
And all of that is true. But at its most basic, all the environment is where you live, work, play, and pray. That's all it is. So whether it's your home, your business, your school, whatever house of worship you attend, like that is what we call your environment. It's where you're living your life, and what are you exposed to in your respective environments, right? So one is to do that basic assessment. From an environmental justice perspective, let's say you're a person of color in a predominantly community of color. You're going to go through the same exercise. You're going to look around and you're going to, just do some basic assessments of, what roadways, what polluting infrastructure, and there will be things that you will look at as when you're looking for environmental justice impacts that'll be different, right? Because a white person looking in a white community will not necessarily think or wonder well, is my community any more or less polluted than other white communities? This is the kind of question that environmental justice people ask themselves, right? Like, it's not just what are the pollution loads in my community, but are we overburdened? Do we have, not just streets and boulevards, but highways or parkways, or do we have manufacturing zones in or around where we live that by definition includes the kind of uses that, because of manufacturing and on some level industrial, have expectations by society that they will be polluting, right? And so as an environmental justice activist, you are looking at the intersection of race and these impacts. And you're looking to see, you're also doing a comparative analysis, right? You're looking at your community and you may, want to just, for comparison's sake, look at a similarly situated white community, or maybe there isn't a similarly situated white community. And in fact, all these burdens tend to be in communities of color and not in majority white community. These are the kinds of analyses that, from an environmental justice perspective, by definition, you're doing, right? There's an intersectionality with environmental justice that mainstream, the usual environmental analyses don't always include. Environmental justice, like the environment, whatever basic environmental education you're doing, it's all intersectional. But with an environmental justice perspective, you're also layering in racial and class differences. You're also looking to see, and the reason why these are important is that environmental laws, regulations, and basically the systems that keep our communities either clean or cleaner, or dirty or dirtier. We have to remember that these we are living in built environments by design. Like, these are not accidents. These are not, a city is built and its growth is determined by its zoning laws, right? Like, you're allowed to do this here, you're not allowed to do that here. So part of, okay, what are you gonna say?
I want to know why that was. Again, I point to I blame everything on Robert Moses, but was it just him, or was it like some some scheming white guys in the smoke-filled room in the 1930s or 40s? I want to know about intent, and we know a little bit about redlining is becoming more in the popular discourse, but for the beginner, how do we trace back those initial errors or sins?
So this goes back to what I was saying before, right? Like, it's all cities are designed, right? Like, there's not a fight. It goes back to the original joke I mentioned, right? New York City being a great town, if we ever finish building it, right? And that's the point, right? Like, cities in particular are constantly changing, and they're always, but how they change is governed by zoning laws, the solid waste management plan, the city and state energy plan, the grid, what's open space and what. So all of this stuff is developed by regulation and law. And to not oversimplify, but let's just look at those two systems. How regulations and laws get written are, up until relatively recently in our history, people of color were not equal power holders in government, city, state, federal. And so, you talk about literally hundreds of years of regulatory and legislative work. Who were the people writing the laws? And for the most part, mostly white men for most of our history. And then, white women, as women started, after the suffragette movement and women started getting into the professional workplace, but it was still white women and people of color, locked out for many years from all kinds of even basic civil service stuff. So like, all of these pieces fit together. All of these add up to a picture, right? I think that there were people, government planners in any and all of these different agencies. Were there some that were intentional in terms of making sure that some communities were screwed over others? Yes, but even they will make there are rational and political reasons people make sometimes these decisions. Sometimes it's malice, And
Mhm.
sometimes it's the path of least resistance. And that's
I was just
most,
going to say, yeah, like if
that's
there isn't an active coalition or known entities in the community, they'll just keep dumping in the same place over and over.
right.
So
And
path of
Manhattan,
least resistance. That's so interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like
Mm.
look at Manhattan. Since we talk about Manhattan, the whole west side of Manhattan for most of its history was a manufacturer. It was the one of the largest shipping hubs in the
Yeah.
United States for decades and decades, right? And then as shipping shifted over to New Jersey, containerization, all that moved over to Jersey, as Manhattan became, whatever working class parts of Manhattan that used to be back in the day largely disappeared in the latter half of the 20th century. And we saw what emerged as pockets, right?
Mm.
Or like largely communities of color, whether it was Uptown, Lower East Side. But, what was working class Manhattan, that population dwindled. And especially if you look at the west side of Manhattan from the Battery to 59th Street, that was heavy manufacturing. And over the years, as the West Village became the West Village, as Chelsea became as they became some of the richest communities in the United States,
Mm.
their lawyers and their planners rezoned
Mm.
that entire Upper West Side of Manhattan. I mean, the whole West Side of Manhattan. And what ends up happening is as you remove manufacturing land and
Mm.
as you rezone from manufacturing to residential, fewer and fewer communities are left with the manufacturing land, right?
Mm.
So we still have well over 4,000 or 5,000 acres of what's known as manufacturing zoned land in the city of New York. The problem is that those 4,000 or 5,000 acres of manufacturing land are almost all populated by majority communities of color. And so that's what happened is that over the years, whether you intentionally set out through redlining, through my God, with the New Deal, when the New Deal came in and
Mm.
the New Deal policies that led to the growth of suburbs and the whole Robert Moses, development of highways and roadways, all to facilitate a white professional class that was developing in the suburbs. Everything became about how do we facilitate the white flight outside of what had become increasingly large metropolitan areas became the beacon for people of color that were coming either out of the South as part of the Black Great Migration of the South, or first and then Latinos, or Latinos first by the Puerto Rican community as a result of Operation Bootstrap in the 40s, and then successive Latino immigration. Whatever it is, cities became magnets for people of color looking for work. At the same moment, when manufacturing started leaving the major urban areas, first for the Southwest and then leaving the United States mostly altogether. And so that's the history of environmental racism in some ways, is that as whites left city, and I'm giving you like the city version of environmental justice, as whites left what's called the inner city and it became more and more predominantly people of color, we saw a variety of government, federal, state, and local programs that encourage that white flight, that encourage the building of highways through our communities, that encouraged whites to buy properties in suburbs and denied blacks the ability to access federal funding, or even if they had funding, to be able to actually purchase the house. Everything was done to accommodate a white work.
And the political power center shifted, and I think of follow the money. In this case, the money followed them in a sense. So that's really helpful, Eddie, to give that background. Really appreciate that. And just wondering, on Civic List, I talk about building community, uplifting voices, and you're close to a lot of great local organizations. I wonder if there's anyone who inspires you. Any voice that's not heard a lot that you want to kind of give a shout out to.
What I love about the members of NEJA is that some of our members, because of their longevity or just because of their vision and their impact, get some recognition. I don't think any of the members get nearly enough recognition, but everyone from Uprose, who's been organizing just fantastically, kind of positioning their community for what they've been calling the green reindustrialization of their manufacturing area. Basically, using the manufacturing zoning that had been the bane of environmental justice existence, and flipping that and making that, and understanding that in manufacturing areas, that is the only place you can actually build and assemble what we need as a society to deal with climate adaptation and resilience and mitigation. Offshore wind, right? Battery store, like the components that we need to make to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions nationally and locally. You need to build that stuff somewhere, right? And as you build your city's resiliency and your adaptation needs, that means a ton of jobs, right? So everything from what they're doing to El Puente, who is in fact one of the founders of NIJA, and has identified an area of their part of Williamsburg in North Brooklyn, what they call the Green Light District, where they are trying to intentionally go block by block to make those blocks the greenest blocks, and therefore come up with a climate-friendly district, right? Both of these are organizations that have gotten some shine over the years. I don't think nearly enough. To good old Lower East Side, Goals in the Lower East Side, or Brooklyn Movement Center in the heart of historically Black Brooklyn, and the work that they are all doing, grappling with things like urban heat island effect, and organizing and teaching their good old Lower East Side does a lot of work in public housing. That's the majority of their community in the Lower East Side. How does public housing get invested, and what are the resources they need to become climate adaptable and reduce their environmental? So all of our groups are doing, and including the one you're a member of, the West Harlem Morningside Heights Sanitation Coalition, developed the first volunteer recycling program in public housing, which should have been a model for the entire city. All of our groups, I think, in one way, shape, or other, are rewriting, redefining what grassroots environmental and climate action looks like. And they're doing it in a way that is principled, in a way that shows solidarity, because that's another really beautiful thing about how they work with each other is, some groups, just worry about their neighborhood and don't think that, if you say oppose a marine transfer station in your community, you're actually screwing another community that is, because the garbage is being handled in a disproportionately burdened community. So what I like about our members is they see each other. They know we're part of a larger family of people of color and low-income white neighbors and allies. And to me, like that, I would urge anybody who's watching this to just go to our website, New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and all of our members, you could just click on any one of our members, go to their websites, because they're really doing, I think, God's work and don't get nearly enough attention or resources for what they do.
Yeah, they definitely are. Thank you for that. I'll definitely provide some links to organizations you suggested. And so thanks, Eddie, for giving those groups a shout out, for telling those stories, giving people some advice on how to take action, doing amazing work. And it's definitely contributing to sustainability, resilience, and environmental justice. So really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Matt. My pleasure.
Thanks, Eddie.
Good luck. Take care.